Welcome to the Chasing Thoughts podcast. Listen in as Mindy, Keith, and their guests take a deep dive into their own minds and souls to investigate the beauty of imperfection, challenge their beliefs, and embrace the richness of living a truly authentic life. Welcome to Chasing Thoughts.
Welcome to season 2, episode 2, where Keith and I talked to Justin Glaser and recorded this episode last week, and it was so much fun. Keith, what was your biggest takeaway?
My biggest takeaway from this was he had a lot of health issues in his life that drove him to writing this book about sweat, and it blew my mind what the health issues actually were. You know, I thought they were going to be these major life-altering things, and it came out of like left field for me, which I loved, and you'll have to listen to find out what they were.
Yeah.
How about you?
I think that I felt really lucky because I was basically about to start sniffing glue in my own home, thinking I was getting healthier, and I was wrong. Welcome to the Chasing Thoughts podcast. Today we have Justin Glaser. Justin is the author of the groundbreaking new bestseller, Sweat: Uncovering Your Body's Hidden Superpower, which reveals sweat's wildly underappreciated role in health, vitality, and disease prevention. I'm super excited to talk to you today, Justin, because I've been trying to convince my husband for several weeks to buy one of those little saunas off Amazon and put it in our yard. So hopefully you're going to give me the information that I need to fuel my argument to convince my husband today. So welcome to the show. I can't wait to hear what you have to say today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So why don't we start out with you just sort of setting up the story of how we got here. I know you experienced a lot of medical challenges when you were young, and then you found this. So kind of tell us a story so we're on the same page as you.
Sure. So I'm 28 years old now. In my late teenage years into college years, I started having a bunch of different health challenges, mostly nothing that required hospital time, but mostly around fatigue, brain fog, depressive, automatic negative thoughts. And it was pretty debilitating, but not in a way that made anyone, pull me out of school or anything like that. It was just to diminish my quality of life to an extreme degree. And when I graduated from school, I was supposed to go on a hike with one of my best friends through Nepal, actually. And when I got home, my parents were like, there's no way you could do that. We think you'd die, because I can like barely walk down the street without seeming exhausted. So that really made me draw a line in the sand and say, I need to figure this out. And so that resulted in trying a bunch of different Western doctors, Eastern doctors, blood tests, genetic tests, acupuncturists, everything under the sun to try and get to the root cause and heal it, because I knew that if I didn't do that, my quality of life would be pretty shot. So it really felt like my back was against a wall. In that process, that was probably a 2-year period. I tried all those things. I became obsessed with reading, talking to people, figuring it out. I stumbled into a sauna one day, just based on a friend's recommendation, went in for 20, 30 minutes, expecting it to, be a dead end like all the other things I've been trying. And when I got out and took a shower, I felt a level of clarity that I hadn't felt since I was, a kid pretty much. And that didn't last forever, but I kept going to the sauna and trying to figure out why this was helping me so much. And ultimately that, compared with a few other things, but mostly through that, took me from feeling terrible to better to, feeling like a kid again, feeling great, and really feeling like I've achieved sort of my 10 out of 10 health that I was looking for. And so this book was really the research project to understand why that was happening. And I was pretty amazed at the findings that made it make total sense to me. And I felt like it was really missing in the market to explain why this is so important and how this actually works and how it could really benefit other people, whether your back is totally against the wall or you're just looking for, improved mood, improved energy, preventative sickness, and that sort of thing. So this year I decided to write the book. I had all the information and just decided to really commit the time and effort to putting this together for people.
I love that. And I know that Keith and I both have sort of strong feelings about big pharma and the amount of pills people take and sort of what the culture of healthcare is in America and how
Mhm.
many sort of basic things, fundamental things have been forgotten or aren't tried before those methods are taken. And so this is one thing that I don't know about very much at all, sweating. And so I'm excited to try it out in my life because I'm 44. And so I'm looking forward into my second half going, how can I do this the healthiest, strongest, with the most vitality possible? Because who doesn't want that, right? We all want to live to our best selves. And I also love in what you said that it's not just about the physical pieces, but about the mental, emotional pieces that you were struggling with too, that anxiety, depression. How long from that first day that you took a sauna to the point where you felt like you had like the 10 out of 10 health? Was that still years of that journey or did that happen pretty quickly?
It was months. It's kind of like if you think of like a graph kind of going up and then down a little bit, but always kind of trending upwards. And then you kind of reach a point where it's like you feel like you're not questioning whether you could feel better. You're like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to feel like all the time. And that becomes, I think that's why people who get into health become addicted to it, because they realize that sort of your, like what your default subjective experience can get, like the bar can get raised for how you feel moment to moment. And I kind of lay out on the book why sweat plays such a critical part in that.
Yeah, I agree with you. What my 10 out of 10 is today might be totally different than what it is a year from now based on the habits I choose in that year. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all
Yeah.
cumulative.
I think that there are a ton of people struggling with the kind of health issues that you described.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's because we live in a more toxic world or we have a lifestyle that doesn't really suit us as humans. But I think more and more you see the rise of, chronic fatigue and those anxiety, depression, all those issues are rising and people can get stuck in them. So I guess what would you say if somebody's listening and they're in that place? Obviously, they're going to try sweating and sauna, and you're going to talk about that. But just, I guess I'm looking for like acknowledgement and validation for everybody who's in that place right now, because it's a tough place to be in. And you know that place from your life experience.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of factors that could play into that. It could be, working in something you find uninspiring or being stuck with sort of like life circumstances. The focus in my book, and you mentioned toxins, is kind of centered around that. So I didn't believe toxins were an issue when I was going through this process. And then after like really diving into it and talking to people, I realized, oh, this is perhaps the issue that's causing modern epidemic and all these conditions. Because the last 60 years, we've introduced tens of thousands of chemicals into the environment that are everywhere. They're in my walls, they're in my couch, they're in my clothes, they're in the air we breathe, they're in the water and food supply. And so the first kind of belief I try and get people to buy into is that we massively underestimate the impact of toxins on our health. Here's why, here's all the studies, here's all the ways it's linked to mental health, physical health, disease, cancers, diabetes, just all this crazy stuff that kind of roots in that. And so that can overwhelm people, but it's also empowering, because once you get that stuff out of your system, your body's remarkable. And so that it's like getting the grease out of the engines or whatever. And your body's meant to function properly once it's had the ability to detox these substances. But we just weren't built to detoxify these substances at the level that we've been exposed to them. And, first, the toxins are an issue. And then two, sweat is actually the best way to detoxify. And so I go very in depth on that and how that works.
Yeah. So I listened to you in another interview, and I know that the beginning of your book, which I ordered on Amazon, but haven't had time to read yet, is about the history of sweat. So can you dig into that a little bit? And then we'll like weave those toxins back in. And Keith is an anthropology nerd, so he's really going to want you to dig in to as much as you can about this history. Like, tell us about how different cultures historically have used sweat.
Yeah, so I think it's an important point, right? Especially with how many pills and biohacks and all this kind of modern approaches to health. When you look through the history, you see that almost for a ton of different cultures used different sweating practices regularly. We had the Native American sweat lodges, the Russian banyas, the Turkish, the Peruvians, the South Americans, the Africans, the Angangs. So it's something that's been used by cultures around the world separately for different reasons, right? For purification rituals, for initiation rites, for cleansing of evil spirits. Essentially, we've all had these rituals around sweating heavily, and there was also a communal aspect to it. And so that was before, there was exposure to heavy metals and other kind of toxins in the environment pre-industrial revolution. But now that's more important than ever, and it applies in kind of a new way. And so I wanted to kind of set the context that this is not some new invention that is like a hack for the human system. We've been practicing this, and now it's more important than ever.
Yeah. And I think what's neat about history is that there's things that we do that might have been for reasons like, would you say, cleansing evil spirits?
Yeah.
But what was really happening on a scientific level, right, is different. It's kind of like today's science that says, hey, we need to touch dirt because the microbes in dirt actually help us, right? And so you're learning that. And so when you look back in time, you can't discount things that were done for said silly reasons because they were actually having this deeper impact all along that we just couldn't talk about in a scientific way for many years.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So Keith and I were just kind of shooting the shit before you got on, and you touched on something that we wondered about. So if him and I are in the sauna together, because you said communal aspect, which made me think of this, and I'm releasing toxins and he's sitting next to me releasing toxins, is that safe, or are we like swapping toxins?
It's a good point, right? So, I mean, what you want to do, I go into depth in terms of like sauna etiquette and how to go about doing a sauna. But really what you want to be doing is wiping off regularly. And maybe as you're releasing sweat, you're wiping it down. It's getting absorbed into the towel. When your towel is pretty wet, maybe step out of the sauna, put it in the bin, get another towel. There's going to be some in the air, I guess, but it's going to be less than what you're expelling, hopefully. And so if you're aiming for like 20 minutes of profuse sweating in a sauna and you're doing that, it's going to be more coming out than going in, let's say. But you do want to minimize sort of what's in the air as well.
Yeah. Do
Good
you
question.
recommend it as a singular practice or a community practice or both? How do you engage in it?
I got a sauna from at home, so a private sauna. I do it by myself. When I'm traveling or if I'm elsewhere, I'm happy to go into a public sauna and hope that there's some etiquette. People will walk in their shoes or with their phone, and it's just I want to like tell them, hey, actually, I wrote a book on this. I think you should consider listening to my advice. But it's certainly fine to go in a public sauna. It's going to be better than worse for you. So I also recommend dry saunas. Don't go into a steam room. I actually advise against that. Mold is common in those. Mold grows in moist, dark environments. That's what a steam room is. And you're breathing in the water vapors that are typically tap water and contaminated. So stick with the dry and infrared.
So what other elements do you add to your sauna? I mean, obviously you're drinking water. Do you put anything special in your water? Do you meditate? Do you listen to something? What is the whole experience like for you?
It varies a little bit. It's not about making it difficult. I have some friends who like to go to a dry versus an infrared because it's harder and it feels hotter, even though you actually sweat less. I'll throw on a podcast through like my glass window. I'll watch a movie or something like that. I'll meditate. And, really it's just about, I view it as just, I need to do this regularly to deal with like the modern exposure. And you really feel it when you do that. And so it's really just about getting a couple towels really wet and getting out of there. It's kind of how I view it. It's just kind of part of the protocol now.
Yeah. Have you also found that due to your research, you are more conscious of the toxins in your life and the products you buy overall?
Definitely. I kind of make like a very simple third grade diagram in the book called like the toxin vitality equation, which is just um, minimize your exposure to toxins on the bottom half and then maximize your detoxification efforts on like the top half. And so it's those two things, right? And so the sweat is to deal with what you already have and are dealing with. And then there's the how do you minimize your exposure component, which I deal with less in the book, but touch on. So that's, I view that as like an 80-20 thing. Air filters for your home, super helpful. Air is actually arguably a much greater source of pollution and like what your toxin exposure than your food even, because you're breathing all the time. And then also I would say water is like a shower filter, which is what you're exposing to through your skin. But yeah, at a certain level, you realize it's unavoidable. And it's something you become aware of that you weren't aware of before, and it can be a bit overwhelming. But, I think you face reality and then you deal with it. And there are ways to deal with it.
Yeah. So I want to move into a little bit talking to you about writing the book. I listened to your interview on a different podcast, and you said, I did not want to write this book, but this book wanted to be written. And I loved that so much, because I feel like that's a common experience for people where you sort of have this soul calling or this urge. And then the practicality of it is that you really don't want to do it. And so, how did you remedy that to push through that and actually create this for other people to read and be healthier?
Yeah, I thought about, I like to do like side projects and things like that. And so I was exploring a few different options for what I could pursue. And this was sort of on my short list. And I looked at it and I thought, all right, I think 50 years from now, I'd really regret not putting this together, because it feels like I stumbled onto some secrets that, for whatever reason, were put in my path, and really believe is perhaps some of the most important information one can learn about health, and can really change your quality of life of your family members, and have a really important ripple effect. And so I think I was on Amazon and I came across a book I had read called Breath by James Nestor. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do for sweat what he did for breath. I think it's even more important than breath personally. So screw it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to give myself 6 months. And then I just carved out the time and did it. But if I knew how hard it would be, I wouldn't have done it. But I think also my why was big enough. So it kind of came together. Not a pleasant process. I'll say that much.
Yeah. And kudos for having the ability to self-discipline, to sit down and write every day. I think you said in your other podcast that you wrote for 3 hours a day. And I think that is kind of one of the beautiful experiences about being a human, is having sort of this intuition and like, I don't know if you want to call it magical or consciousness or undefined, and then having to define it and put it into 3 hours a day, and right, both of those things to birth something into the world. And I'm so glad that you did that, because you created something that's a valuable piece of information for folks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really nice. During those 6 months, there's no feedback loop from other people about what I'm doing. So it's just kind of writing into the void. And then finally it comes out and you start to get feedback and that kind of affirmation that it was worth the effort. So it's been nice to do that, because it only came out 6 weeks ago. So I'm still in the first push of getting it into the world.
Yeah. And for all of our listeners who haven't checked it out on Amazon, it has a lot of 5-star reviews and a lot of great feedback. So congratulations on that, because that must just feel great.
Thank you. Yeah. It's confirming that my hunch was right. And so, I'm just looking to spread it as much as possible.
So do you have any plans in the future to expand these ideas, write another book, do workshops? Like do you see growth in this area, or do you feel like, okay, I got what's in me out in this way, time for a different side project?
Yeah, I think when I was writing it, I decided to kind of put blinders on and just say this, my one goal the next 6 months outside of the other stuff is to write the best book I can that I feel like can stand the test of time and will be valuable 10, 100 years from now, hopefully. And so I feel like I did that, which was great. And then these past few weeks, it's been focused on the marketing component and really pushing it as hard as I can and spreading the message. That's just been interesting to kind of get inbound opportunities, people saying, hey, I'd love to talk about a company opportunity or something like that. Right now, the main focus is just spreading the book. I think, there's tons of things related to this. I go really in depth into something called the niacin sauna protocol in the book that I believe is perhaps kind of like the pinnacle of the ideas in the book, kind of culminates in that as a healing protocol. I really believe in that. So I'm not sure where this leads, but right now it's just really about pushing the book.
Yeah. So tell us, besides Amazon, because I saw it on there, where else can people get the book? Is it available everywhere? Barnes and Noble? Is it on audiobook yet? Tell us a little bit about like how the marketing rollout goes.
Sure. It's available. Yeah, so you can check it out on Amazon. It's Kindle, paperback, and hardcover right now. I did record the audiobook. I'm still uploading that. And then I've got it on TikTok Shop. And I'm really prioritizing Amazon just because it's such a dominant player in this space. So that's the main place to get it right now.
So you actually read it yourself for the audio?
I did. That was an interesting process.
I love that. I love when authors read their own books for audiobooks. I'm big on audiobooks while I'm gardening or cleaning or doing whatever. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I did it 3 weeks ago, I think. I went in and did it over a couple of days. Something that would have been valuable to do while writing the book, because you really engage with it in a different way and go, ooh, I like this, I don't like this, that sort of thing. Overall, I was happy, but you definitely catch some things where you're like, I could see second edition stuff coming down.
Okay, so I'm going to ask just a couple of simple questions that I know are in the book, but I'm curious. Does it matter if I want to buy one for my backyard, if I get the $1,500 model or the $6,000 model? Like, does sauna technology improve, or is it not really make a difference?
Yeah, so this is, I wanted to come back to this when you said at the beginning. The sauna industry is unregulated, and so there's no sort of oversight in terms of claims or anything like that. And it's really important to realize, and I learned this during the process, that there are a couple of things to look out for when getting a sauna, particularly infrared saunas. So one is toxic materials in the builds. So using glues, flame retardants, bamboo. This is a really big problem, because if you think in a car, if you get into like a really hot car on a summer day and you have a plastic water bottle, you leave and you come back, you drink it, it's going to taste like plastic because toxins migrate with heat. And so if you have essentially a hot box that's heating up and releasing these VOCs into the air, you're doing the exact opposite of what you signed up for in the first place of getting a sauna, because you're literally in a confined space breathing in toxins from the build. A lot of companies lie that they don't have this going on, and then you'll have independent people testing it and showing VOC reports. And then the other thing to look out for is something called EMFs, which are electromagnetic frequencies that the jury's a little bit out on their health impacts, but some people believe it's really, really bad for you in terms of radiation. And so with infrared saunas, you really want to make sure it's a low EMF infrared. The portable sauna space, like the Amazon kind of like stick your head out, or even like plastic zip up things, none of them kind of pass that sniff test. So I'm in a Facebook group of 50,000 members who bought every sauna under the sun and tested them. There's not a single portable sauna on the market that passes that test. And so unfortunately, this was one side project I was considering, is starting that business that can make those. But really, you need to get a wooden sauna if you're going to get one for your home. So maybe we can link to that Facebook group for people to kind of dig around and see what saunas are available that actually pass that test. Because you'll get on the phone with companies and the salesperson will just not care that they're lying to your face about some results, things like that. So it's kind of that thing with health. It's like, all right, this is a healthy thing, but what are some unintended consequences that might occur if I start implementing this? That's the big one. That, and also you're sweating out a lot of stuff, so you want to replenish.
I am so glad that you shared that.
Yeah, yes, it's an important point.
We'll put the Facebook group and any other links that you find valuable in the show notes. And when you said it, it's like a light bulb went off. Of course, if they're using weird glues and all sorts of other things, I don't want to be in that. Or if it's plastic, And it's something that I just never had thought about before. So I think that is great information. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was my first question. Second question is, how often are you going in your sauna, and does it vary, or is it pretty much the same week after week after week?
I think like a minimum dose that I recommend to people is 3 days a week of 20 minutes of really heavy sweating. Like you're sweating and then you wipe and then your sweat emerges in a couple seconds. And so getting 3 sessions of 20 minutes, I know that's what Dr. Pizzorno recommends. He's a leader in sort of the alternative health world. And that tends to feel really good. I'll usually go up to maybe 5 days a week. I like to take a couple days off.
Mm-hmm. When you were doing your research, did anything come up about how people sweat differently?
Yeah, so as I was writing the book, I would use this accountability app where I'd pair with someone for a work session. I think it's called Focus Mate. And you'd say what you're working on. And I'd say, oh, I'm working on chapter 2 of my book. I'll see you at the end of the session. And then they'd say, what's your book on? And very often I'd tell them and they'd be like, they'd immediately open up like, I don't sweat at all. What's going on? Or like, I sweat all the time. I don't know why I'm such an excessive sweater. Like a shocking percentage of people. The research on this isn't that clear from what I found in terms of, it's called hyperhidrosis if you sweat a lot, hypohidrosis if you don't at all, or like you undersweat. The argument that made the most sense to me is, you know, if you're about to go on stage for public speaking and your hands get kind of balmy or something like that, or you start getting nervous, the idea is that you have like an overactive stress response, fight or flight response, and that's causing excessive sweating is one argument. Another argument would be you have a really high toxic load and your body is just doing what it can, like even when you're not in a hot environment to sweat is one argument. But to be frank, it wasn't very clear. And so I didn't include any data on that in the book.
Yeah, it's interesting because so my husband is a major sweater and I'm not a sweater, and we'll go on a hike and I won't have one drop of sweat and his shirt will be like wring out, soaking, sweat dripping off his hat, right? And so when I'm thinking about it in terms of sweating out toxins, I'm thinking, well, my husband probably needs a 20-minute session. I probably need the hour session to get the same amount of sweat out of my body. And that's what led me to ask it, is like, that's interesting. And have you found at all that the amount that you sweat varies over time or based on your level of stress, or does it change throughout your life and your sauna experience?
The main thing you'll notice and other people notice is it'll take different amounts of time to start sweating, or the quantity of sweat, even if all the other variables are the same, like the temp in your sauna is the same, you know, you're going at the same time. And I don't have a clear answer for that. I think there's a lot of variables, like what your diet has been like, how's your sleep been, that could be causing different sort of response levels. So yeah, there's still a lot of research to be done. the sweat is kind of a, you know, the idea is kind of a backdoor for that main issue, right? So the main issue is the toxin issue, and the sweating is really just this, thank God the human body has this sort of release valve that we tend to underestimate for this issue once you buy into the size of the issue, and sweat's just the best way to deal with it, and sauna is the best way to sweat. So
yeah, I had no relationship with sweating, like never thought about it until I read Born to Run, which talks about the importance of sweat, right? And how that's why we can outrun animals, because we're shedding heat in a way that they can't, which was fascinating. And so this will kind of be my second real curiosity and engagement with sweat when I get your book and really start to try it out. And I'm big, and it sounds like you are too, on experimenting in my life. So I'll take a new thing and say, okay, I'm going to try this on for 3 months or 6 months, and then, you know, journal how it's affecting my life and see if it's something that I want to keep. So I'm excited to take this on as sort of an experiment to see, how does it impact my life? And do I want to keep it? Do I want to invest in it for my home? And I think the answer is yes, but
I hope so. It tends to be. You know, there's two sides of it, right? There's the, wow, I notice my energy level's up, my mood's better, I feel more resilient in terms of stress response, my mind feels sharper, My mental clarity's up, all those kinds of things, which are great. And some people have different experiences with that for different reasons. Then there's the preventative side. So there's the disease prevention side. So the things you're not going to see, the fact that you don't get cancer in 25 years, not medical advice, but just the idea that there might be a tie between toxins and these diseases. You're not, Alzheimer's and things like that. So there's the things you don't see in terms of results, but then there's also the sort of immediate benefits that hopefully that a lot of people experience.
Yeah. It's funny. My dad has fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. And I told him that I was doing this interview and he said, "Oh, good. Give me the book when you're done," because there have been so many fibromyalgia patients who have recommended this and so many of his doctors who have recommended sauna and sweating because it helps with fibromyalgia. And so your interview kind of really came at an opportune time for someone in my family, and I'll be passing the book on to him, and hopefully he'll have the same results that other people with fibromyalgia have had, where as they detox, they start to feel better.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I don't know too much about fibromyalgia, but the idea that sort of a lot of these things are rooted in this issue is kind of big. And as I was researching this, I kind of looked around. I'm like, why haven't I heard of this before? Why wouldn't the medical system push these ideas if they're true? And so the kind of conclusion you get to is, let's assume this is true, and toxins are a root cause of most of the issues we're dealing with in the modern world. And sauna and sweat is the best solution for it. If we buy into that, let's say the medical system totally went, sold, this is true. The whole ship's not just going to turn in that direction because the incentive structure is not there. Their incentive structure is not to make the healthiest, most vibrant human being. Their incentive structure is dealing with sick people. And so it's not a right or wrong thing. It's just the reality of the situation. So I think that helps explain why we haven't heard of this that much, because it's just not, even if it's true, which I believe it is, and a lot of people do, it won't change what you're hearing from sort of the big ships. I think of it like a big ship. Like it takes a long time to turn a big ship versus a little ship. Kind of like startup world, where you need startups to kind of come in and disrupt and bring the new ideas, because you're not going to hear it from the bigger players.
Very true. And like you mentioned, with some of the companies who aren't being completely honest about their materials, we live in a capitalist society, right? Money is oftentimes the goal, whether that's prescription medications or toxin-laden things, right? And like you said, good or bad, it's not about the judgment, it's about the truth of it and how to navigate that world that is set up that way, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think with the sauna companies, I think there's a convincing that it's not as big as of a deal as maybe some people claim, or toxic materials doesn't matter that much, or EMFs aren't that big of a deal. My thinking is just, if you're going to be using this multiple times a week for years, like, let's just set you up to minimize exposure to these things while the jury's still out on how much of an impact they can have. I mean, the toxin thing, that jury's done. The EMF thing is a little bit more gray, but if you have the choice. So that's on that piece.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to ask Justin to brag about himself in a couple minutes. Keith, did you have any questions or anything that you wanted to kind of dive in before we go to that stage of the recording?
Yeah, I am blown away by all of this. I would not think that something as common as sweat would be so impactful, on our lives. And I've seen, in my own life, how a lot of important stuff is sort of lost into background noise, where like what the easier place to go through is like Mindy was saying, the pharmacy, the medicines, in fact, I knew somebody that their first year in college going through some depression and stuff, and the first thing they do is put them on antidepressants and stuff. So this is just blowing my mind, that how important it is, especially in this day and age where everything is more sedentary. And I was talking to Minnie prior to, and we live in these houses that we insulate the outside from, and we almost sit in our own toxins constantly. And that was actually a question I had. So with the onset of COVID, there was a lot more at home workouts. So people are sweating in their home, and then in the wintertime, especially in the Northeast, you got the windows closed, there's no ventilation, are we just reabsorbing like all those toxins and the way that we live, how is that affecting us with bringing those toxins in and trapping them inside of us?
Yeah, well, I think the home is kind of the most important place to optimize in terms of minimizing exposure. I can do a better job with that, frankly. I think air filters is kind of an area that I'm very interested in exploring more deeply, just because you're just in here breathing 16 hours a day if you're working from home. So optimizing the home, like I said, the paints, the couches, your pillow that you're on 8 hours a night, this stuff just adds up. In terms of, the COVID and the working out and those things, I think that's somewhat of an issue. I think it's better that they were sweating than not sweating, but because at least some of it's getting out and they're exercising, which is always healthy. But, I think there's a lot of opportunities for people to come in and create solutions for just like making the home as healthy and toxin free as possible. The carpets, the petrochemicals in the carpets, it's just becomes like whoa, I just didn't see any of this before. If you buy into the fact that it matters, which hopefully, my book explains why you should. So yeah, it's wild. And like I said, I wouldn't have come across this information if my back wasn't against a wall and it required me going through dozens of options to kind of realize like, okay, maybe this is the route. And then, wow, it is. And then joining communities online where I'm seeing thousands of other people went through that process and came to this root cause. And then why haven't I heard of this? And now you understand why you haven't heard of it. So it's this really, really backwards thing that wouldn't be in some ways is intuitive to know, in other ways isn't intuitive to know because of how deep the programming is around how we think about our health that's coming from these trillion-dollar organizations, essentially.
Yeah. Did you find any resources on when you're going to go buy, change out a carpet or buy a new couch or something?
Yeah.
Are there places to go where you can find places that are selling less toxic material or maybe better material?
So that we'll link to that Facebook group. It's 50,000 members who many were in a similar situation to me. And so they all kind of have this, healthy distrust, I guess would be a way to term it, of products, of solutions, of ideas, and that sort of thing. And so it's this really cool hive mind of people coming to sharing their information. Like, hey, this is the best mattress I've found. Here's why. Here are the studies on it. I checked it out. I really researched it. And you can kind of piece those together. There's an app called, I think it's called Think Dirty, for like home products, that looks at sort of the cleanliness of different products, whether your shampoos or your dish soap, your detergent, like this stuff. It becomes a rabbit hole for sure. And it's not meant to be overwhelming. I think like I said, accept that it's real and then take some steps to deal with it, right? So I think that Facebook group is really helpful. And it would be great to have sort of a website. I'm sure they're out there that kind of consolidates this information. But for now, I found the best places, those Facebook communities.
Yeah, because I can see how that can become very overwhelming, for somebody that has never looked into it or anything. And just like, man, everything that I'm using is toxic to me, in our environment. So,
the low-hanging fruit, I would say, is switching out your water. Tends to be something that there's kind of I think an important thing with like these health things is, are you going to actually implement it? Is it doable? And so it's easy to say all these things. If you have a sauna at home, I think you're going to pretty regularly sauna versus if you need to drive an hour and a half to a place that doesn't have a shower and you're saunaing or something like that.
right.
And so making it something that you can form into a habit is helpful. And switching out your water, I think that's a bottle right there, to like a glass bottled spring water, like a Mountain Valley or a Shasta, is one sort of like low hanging fruit to start to feel, hey, maybe I do feel a little different when I'm not drinking plastic water bottles from reservoirs versus actual springs and that sort of thing.
Mm.
One thing that I heard you say, which I think is important right now, because we're talking about it, is that for you, sauna triggered a healthier lifestyle. And I think that there are things like that, and maybe they're not the same things for everybody, where you start doing one thing and then all of a sudden it makes drinking water easier. It makes eating vegetables easier, right? There's something that switches in the mind when you start to feel a little bit better that invites more health. And I think when we can find those things, and that's why I would probably, really jump on something like this, because it's like, oh yes, this could be one of those nuggets that has a huge like fulcrum point for all these other things.
Yes. Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. My experience with health stuff has been it's either like a positive feedback loop or a negative feedback loop. And there's no real middle ground. It's like grow or die kind of thing. And the sauna, it's just such low hanging fruit. Like you just sit in there. You can watch a movie through the screen if you have your own, and you just sweat. And I've had multiple people come to me and say, I was eating unhealthy that week, and then I did a couple sauna sessions, and all of a sudden I felt myself gravitating towards healthier foods.
Yes.
And wanting to go to the gym because my energy went up a little bit. So I had the energy to go to the gym, and it could start that positive feedback loop. I was arguably the least healthy eater you've ever spoken to. I lived on pizza, cheeseburgers, Oreos, ice cream, and drove my parents crazy. And that certainly contributed to by the time I hit 18, even though I was always like skinny and athletic and didn't really look like I had things going on, certainly contributed to what I was dealing with, right? And so I would say sauna helped me go in a completely different direction in terms of the health and really be kind of arguably one of the healthiest eaters you now talk to. So it's been an interesting ride.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So take a couple minutes to say anything else that you want to say. If you want to share your website, we'll put all the stuff in the show notes, but is there any kind of last minute bragging that you want to do before we close out?
I don't know about bragging, but I'd love people to check out the book. I have another copy here. It's a short read, 130 pages. No fluff. It really just gets to the point. Check it out on Amazon. If you want to reach out with any questions, my email is justin@sweatthebook.com. I love hearing from people. My Twitter is Hey Justin Glaser. My Instagram is Justin Glaser7. And I really hope you enjoy it. And feel free to reach out with comments via email or social media.
All right, that's perfect. So now I'm going to ask you one silly question before we close, because we like to close with a silly question. What's the most embarrassing song on your playlist?
I'm a big Taylor Swift fan, so I guess any of that would make people embarrassed.
I love that. I was staunchly in the non-Taylor Swift fan just because she's so popular. And then the other day, I'm listening to the song on the radio going like, oh my gosh, this song is amazing. And I looked it up and it was Taylor Swift. I'm like, God dang it, I do like her.
Yeah, she's great.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Justin. It's been great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Chasing Thoughts podcast. Please support us by liking, subscribing, or leaving a review or comment. We would really appreciate it. If you'd like to be a guest, we would love to explore life and what it means to be human with you. Please email us at chasingthoughtspodcast@gmail.com.